Welcome to our first ever virtual Salute to Courage benefit. Thank you for being here today to support Kindering's children and families. Kindering's incredible educators and therapists, and our mission to ensure that families on the unexpected journey of raising children with diverse needs thrive. My name is Dennis Bounds. I'm thrilled to be your host. While we are in a very different venue today, our reason for gathering remains the same. We are here to celebrate the courage of all the children and families in Kindering's care. I am a great supporter of Kindering. I've been affiliated with this program for probably close to 25 years. And if you haven't heard the story, I'm the father of a developmentally disabled son. He is now 41 years old and thriving, but we didn't live in the area at the time that he was born, and I only wish that we could have had the kinds of services that Kindering offers to the hundreds of thousands of families in Western Washington. They're deriving the benefits of this great program, and that's why we're all gathered here today. I'd like to kick things off by taking a few minutes to thank the fearless leaders and sponsors that poured so much of themselves into today. This event would not be possible without you. Thank you to our event chairs, Holly and David May. You'll get a chance to hear their family story later in the show. Thank you for stepping up and championing this event. A very special thanks to our Salute to Courage benefit sponsors who have collectively underwritten today's broadcast. Better yet, thanks to this new virtual format and no hotel ballroom for 400 delicious salads, our sponsors have put forth an inspiring match of more than $25,000 for every dollar given today. A huge thank you to our presenting sponsor, Allegro Pediatrics. They've been the presenting sponsor for this event since 2007, and they've gainfully employed my son since 2000. Diamond sponsors, the Biella Foundation, Starbucks, and Symetra. And thanks to our platinum sponsor, Parker Smith & Feek, and to our other event sponsors, Pay Northwest and Nintendo. Annually, Kindering transforms the lives of more than 6,500 children with their truly best-in-class pediatric therapies and specialized early learning supports. Today, our children and families continue to be more and more diverse in their backgrounds and diagnoses, including Down syndrome, autism spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy, as well as hearing, vision, cognitive, motor, communication, feeding and behavior supports, and developmental milestone delays. At Kindering, moms and dads, brothers and sisters speaking more than 60 languages are empowered and educated to celebrate and care for their child, sister, or brother with diverse abilities, all while receiving comfort from their Kindering service team who become their support system, often like second families. Kindering's early support services also support children and families experiencing housing instability or foster and kinship care. We know that Kindering services and support for a child's development does not stop during a pandemic. In fact, meeting the needs of their families, providing stability and support is of paramount importance right at this very moment. Since March 1st, Kindering has provided more than 30,000 remote telehealth sessions to children and families. These supports include occupational therapy, physical therapy, feeding therapy, speech-language therapy, school readiness supports, family support, family education and training, counseling, developmental evaluations, and more. And delivering these services virtually is merely one part of Kindering's story these past 7 months. Amid this ever-changing landscape, one thing remains constant. Kindering continues to support our children and families in innovative and effective ways. We're going to give you a quick peek at what teletherapy looks like, and then Kindering CEO, Dr. Lisa Greenwald, is going to share more about what Kindering looks like today.
Hi, Riley. How are you guys doing? Repeating them or losing them on her own because it has that melodic coloring. Any new words or new phrases that she
It's my honor to welcome you to Kindering's 15th Salute to Courage benefit. If we've not met yet, I am Dr. Lisa Greenwald, CEO at Kindering, and I'm so grateful all of you have made it a priority to support Kindering during these unprecedented times. I have to say, our annual Salute to Courage event is a personal favorite of mine. Each year we gather to enjoy each other's company, share a meal, and celebrate our Kindering community together. And I leave our luncheon with renewed inspiration, hearing from the courageous Kindering families and connecting with each of you. Let me tell you, I really miss you all, and I cannot thank you enough for being here virtually and for your steadfast support of Kindering's children and families. Imagine a world where every child with developmental needs gets the support they need, early and effectively, even during the most challenging of times. Because Kindering offers critical pediatric therapy, specialized early learning, and family support to about 6,500 children and families in our community annually, we are paving the way. Thanks to previous investments in innovation and teletherapy, paired with recent gifts for additional technology and training and more, we successfully shifted to virtual services due to the pandemic. In our pediatric therapy program alone, we've provided about 30,000 teletherapy sessions since March. During teletherapy, Kindering specialists coach and support parents or caregivers, as together they create and implement strategies that advance each child's unique development, such as learning to move, walk, play, listen, problem solve, or communicate. And as a community leader in teletherapy, our staff were thrilled to train and support our early intervention colleagues across the state, as they too made this necessary transition. To ensure that our children with the greatest medical and equity needs could make the gains they urgently need, we began augmenting teletherapy with critical hands-on, in-person support in early August, with crucial health and safety protocols in place. And now we are planning how to safely phase in expanded in-person services with a hybrid approach. Like all of you, Kindering is weathering the COVID storm every day, and it hasn't been an easy journey. Not for our therapists, who completely transformed their strategies to work in a primarily virtual world, and who deeply miss seeing their children and families in person. And not for our families, who've had to overcome tremendous hurdles, like losing their homes, jobs, or loved ones, or struggling to access this virtual world of technology. Through this all, our families are partnering with Kindering staff more than ever before to ensure their child's developmental progress. And I will forever be grateful to our staff and families for their persistence, flexibility, innovation, and resilience. It is for all these reasons that I can report the greatest news. Overall, when comparing outcomes pre-COVID to today, on average, our children are making the same impressive levels of developmental progress, reaching their life-changing goals. Knowing that just makes me so happy. And I know this could not have been accomplished without the nimbleness of our staff and the generosity of our community. In the early learning arena, one of our 2020 innovations is the Kindering Virtual Play Pass, or KVPP, a live online early education program in English, Spanish, and both. This subscription-based program is open to current and new families from literally anywhere, allowing families near and far to access our specialists and dozens of classes with lessons, routines, and socialization typically seen in person. We could never replace the irreplaceable Stepping Stones preschool and other classes, but KVPP, born out of adversity and impossibility, has quickly become a treasured opportunity for young children and families to gain support and connect with each other. We believe it will outlive COVID and become a long-term complement to Stepping Stones once in-person classes resume. This is because KVPP gives families ultimate flexibility in schedule, age, location, with no commutes or geographic limitations. And because of supporters like you, we can make KVPP available for families regardless of their finances. In the family support area, I'm thrilled to share that our now virtual SIB shops and SIB shop facilitator training are thriving in this new environment. SIB shops are lively, kid-friendly workshops designed to meet the unique needs of siblings of children with disabilities. I almost couldn't believe it when I learned that just since July, our sibling support director trained people from 24 states and 9 countries, and counting, to become certified SIB shop facilitators, including in Ireland, Japan, Singapore, Argentina, and Ecuador. And now there's a sip shop launching in Nigeria, the first on the continent of Africa. We are so pleased to expand our reach in these ways. Kindering's mission of embracing children with special needs is deeply rooted in our commitment to equity. From our founding by 5 families raising children with diverse needs 58 years ago, we have worked to create a more inclusive and equitable world, starting with our youngest community members. Further, for the past many years, the majority of our Kindering children have both a disability and represent a racial minority. This intersection of race and disability is very important and too often overlooked. Thus, we've been increasingly focused on advancing racial equity at Kindering. In 2019, we hired an equity and inclusion officer to lead our equity work and Kindering's diversity, equity, and inclusion team. This is a diverse group of staff working collaboratively as they lead our agency work plan to reduce barriers, address disparities, and advance equity at Kindering. Providing critical direction, a group of Black, Indigenous, people of color, mixed, and LGBTQ staff best articulated Kindering's equity, vision, and mission that all connected to Kindering can honestly say, I belong, and to eradicate systemic, racial, and oppressive barriers so everyone at Kindering succeeds. Because of your support, we've been able to grow in our equity journey, adapt and innovate to support our children and families, and keep our talented staff through this uncertain time. Our mission remains paramount, and when you make a commitment to invest in Kindering, you're making a commitment to strengthening the future of our entire community. As these photos of Kindering alumni show, together we're laying the foundation for a lifetime of success. Your donations today help us expand our virtual services widely, provide the technology necessary to access these services, purchase PPE to resume in-person services safely, and dream bigger than ever for the future of Kindering and our families. Thank you for not letting this pandemic stop us from supporting and celebrating our Kindering community, and saluting the families who partner with us each day to nurture hope, courage, and the skills to soar.
Thanks, Lisa. I would now like to introduce you to this year's event chair, Holly May. Holly is a passionate member of Kindering's board, and most importantly, she is a mom to a precocious 3-year-old Kindering grad.
Hello, I'm Holly May, and I'm a proud member of the Board of Directors of Kindering. And I'm also thrilled to chair this year's Salute to Courage benefit. I'm the mother of Barrett May, who has been receiving services from Kindering since he was 18 months. So my family moved to the Seattle area about 2 years ago. I actually moved here for work. And Barrett was 18 months at the time. And at that point in time, when we had relocated from San Francisco, he had been tracking on all of his developmental milestones. He was a very healthy kid, and we really had no expectation that anything would not go as planned. And when we arrived in Seattle, we put him in daycare for the very first time. We thought it important that he get a social experience, and he very much enjoyed it. I also got to commute with him because his daycare was on the first floor of my office building. But through that, I started to notice differences. He wasn't waving. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't responding to his own name. And I panicked. The first thing I did was we called our pediatrician, our very new pediatrician, given that we had just moved to town. And we brought him in, and she did a thorough evaluation. It took about over an hour. And then I heard the words I never thought I'd hear, that I would need to have my son evaluated for autism. My world stopped. I didn't know what to do. We were new to town. We barely had a pediatrician. It was our first appointment. And we didn't know anyone with children on the autism spectrum at that point. No friends, no family members. It couldn't have caught us more off guard. And the pediatrician was very helpful. She gave us the list, and for those of you parents who are familiar, it's that long list of providers, places where you can go to have your child evaluated. But she did warn us that those wait lists were between 12 and 18 months long. But she also told us about Kindering. which, looking back, I'm really not sure what we would have done had we not gotten the advice to call Kindering. She told us that Kindering was a place that we could go while we waited on those long wait lists to have the formal evaluation, to look into early intervention services. So we went home. I went into action mode as a mother, trying to manage the situation, trying to find any semblance of control that I could in the midst of this earth-shattering moment. And I called, all the centers that do autism evaluations, and she was absolutely right. 12, 18-month wait lists, and I just went into more of a feeling of panic, feeling like there was nothing I could do. But as she suggested, my next call was Kindering. And through that, within 1 week, we had an appointment to have him evaluated to see if he was eligible for early intervention services. So we came in, and immediately we knew that he was going to be well taken care of. In most situations, coming into a new environment, he might panic, he might cry, he might not know where he is, but he was immediately at ease here. And I credit that to the providers who made him immediately comfortable. So through that session, we became eligible for those services. And we almost immediately, I'm telling you, it was within a week or two, were set up with both a speech therapist, an SLP, as well as an occupational therapist. And he was able to get those services while we waited to have him evaluated for autism. We were very lucky as a family, as he was evaluated within 3 months of that date, and we received that diagnosis. But we never stopped working with Kindering. Even when he became eligible for ABA services, it was very important to us to stay with Kindering, to stay with his OT and SLP that he had been working with. But it was the organization as a whole that had a really big impact on us because it felt like a family right off the bat. We knew we were taken care of. They understood that we had nowhere to turn, that we didn't have contacts in the Seattle area, but they were there for us, only a phone call away, and we felt that immediately. And in probably the most challenging time of our lives, we knew we had a place to turn. So he's been with Kindering about 1.5 years now, and we just went through, prior to the pandemic, the transition period of moving from that 3-year mark of age into the public school system. And I've got to tell you, I was panicked. I did not want to leave Kindering by any means, but I was so impressed by the process. It was such a smooth transition that Kindering had the contacts in our public school system. They knew the people, and they sat down with us and spent the time to talk us through what it would look like and what we could expect on the other end. It couldn't have gone better. And we were very excited to get him into the public school system, to get him around other children again. Then COVID hit. My son actually was able to attend class for, I think, a whole week before COVID hit. And once again, we were in the panic of, what if my son regresses? He can't get services now. And Zoom is certainly not an option for a child with Barrett's diagnosis and his special needs. So once again, what did I do? I called Kindering. I said, look, I know my son has aged out. It could not be at a worse time. Is there anything you can do to help me? And that's when I was first introduced to Kids Clinic. And we were able to be set up with an OT who was able to provide excellent consulting support to his ABA team, to us, and really think through how we could make this time that continues during this pandemic, work for Barrett. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. My son's regressed over the past several months. It's been devastating to watch, but I wouldn't judge my situation any differently than any other parent. We're all going through our own set of challenges right now. Everybody's situation is unique, and it's impossible to say my situation's worse than anybody else's. But what I would say is, at a time of challenge, feeling like you're supported, knowing somebody is there to help you work through these problems is everything. And that's what Kindering has been to us. and I want him to be happy. And I also want him to feel secure and to feel loved and to feel part of a community. And that's what we've found here. And that's why it's important that all of you support Kindering at this time, now more than ever, because of what it means to the families in this community. Everyone's struggling right now. So I'd ask that you continue to allow these families to feel like they're supported, that there's hope for their kids, that they're going to continue getting the excellent services that they've received in the past from Kindering, and just know how much it means to the child's development, and how much it means to the families to have a place to turn, especially in these challenging times.
Thank you for sharing your family's journey, Holly, and thank you again for stepping up and leading this event with passion and grace. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Lucy Lee Helm, today's keynote speaker. Lucy Helm has been a partner at Starbucks since 1999 and is now leading as her Executive Vice President and Chief Partner Officer. Lucy is a lifelong disability rights advocate and a champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion work throughout our community. I am thrilled to have her join us today.
I'm honored to be part of this celebration of Kindering. I first learned of this wonderful organization several years ago. Your mission of hope spoke to me, providing support to children of diverse abilities and their families, and services to nurture hope, courage, and the skills to soar, which is not far from Starbucks' mission to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, one neighborhood at a time. And your mission also spoke to me as a person who identifies as a disability rights activist. I claim that moniker with pride. I've supported persons with disabilities for most of my life. And I reflected on that this past year as we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the passage of the American with Disabilities Act, a landmark civil rights legislation which not only prohibits discrimination based on disability, but also changed our very perspectives about the dignity and worth of all persons with disabilities. You know, I credit my passion about disability rights to my childhood. My cousin Barbara was 1 year older than me. She was in my group of cousins, a cohort, and Barbara was different. Different speech patterns, different abilities to understand social cues, a different speed of how she operated. Barbara's disability was not defined then, and I still don't know what it is now. But her parents, particularly my Aunt Mary, were fierce advocates for services for her. And that was 60 years ago when resources were scarce. But Barbara went to college, community college. She got a job, and she now still thrives independently, living on her own. And I had a neighbor named Denny. He was developmentally disabled, a bit more severely than Barbara. And he was about 10 years or 15 years older than those of us who played together in a childhood gang. But he loved us, he played with us, he did kickball and hide and go seek. And he was a gentle soul. And what I remember is we never ever mocked or made fun of him. We just loved him. And I didn't know then, but I realize now that these relationships deeply shaped me. And in college, when I was invited to work at an Easter Seals camp, a residential camp for children and adults with a variety of physical, mental, and emotional disabilities, those were the happiest summers of my life. And I learned big lessons about the authentic respect, dignity, and appreciation of all people with disabilities and their families who love them. And what I learned then was about independence for those persons with disabilities. The campers at that camp made their own decisions about their schedules and activities. They were independent. And I became humbled to experience what it's really like to support a person living with a disability. An impactful relationship from my camp experience was my friend Helen. Helen had spastic cerebral palsy, no use of her arms and legs, and little use of her voice. But she could talk if you took the time to understand her, you could. And one day I was swimming with Helen in the swimming pool, and Helen was trying to tell me something. And after 3 or 4 tries, I still didn't understand, so I pretended that I did. And she took her fist and hit the water and told me never, ever to do that again, never to patronize her. If I didn't understand her, I was to stop and ask her to say it again. And it was a lesson that I never forgot. After camp, I finished law school and went into the private practice of law, and I didn't love it. And I looked for work with more meaning, and I took a social worker role. at a place called the Center for Accessible Living. And that was part of the independent living movement that began in the late 70s and 80s, in which people were providing services supporting equal opportunities, self-determination, and self-respect and independence for persons with disabilities. My job was an advocacy counselor, both individual and policy advocacy. I represented individuals gaining access to benefits or challenging discrimination, and I advocated for legislative policies championing the rights of people with disabilities. And what I learned in that job was a lot about the rights and dignities of people with disabilities, ending victimization or pity or a medical view of persons who just happen to be disabled, but instead thinking of them not as sick or defective or less than, but neither brave or courageous simply because they did ordinary things in life like marry or live in their own communities or have a job. And I learned that not all people with disabilities are the same. People that were blind and people that were deaf and people that used wheelchairs or had autism all had different kind of expectations, but they all had one community. And most importantly, back then, I got the advantage to connect with a group of people underground championing for the rights of people with disabilities. A group that I got particularly inspired by was ADAPT, which is a national grassroots community that organizes disability rights activists beginning in the 1970s and 80s to engage in nonviolent direct action, including civil disobedience, to assure the civil and human rights of people with disabilities to live in freedom. And I participated with them in local protest, marches. I watched people in wheelchairs tying themselves to buses to protest against inaccessible public transportation. A tremendously impactful moment in my life was when I got to participate with ADAPT in a protest in Atlanta, Georgia. The Department of Transportation was meeting there to consider legislation regarding accessible public transportation. And hundreds of wheelchair users and other persons with disabilities gathered and converged upon that site and asked for an audience to talk about their rights to public transportation. And when they didn't get in, they conducted a sit-in. And they sat right down in the federal building in Atlanta. And when they weren't heard, they got out of their wheelchairs and lay on the ground. And my support role as what we call a temporary able-bodied person was to help them and support them in that sit-in. And we stayed there overnight with permission from President George H.W. Bush. And this was just one example of brave disability advocates taking to the streets to demand their rights. It was a moment that changed my life. Watching these brave advocates speaking their truth and speaking up for change. If you haven't seen the movie Crip Camp, it's about a camp in the 70s, Camp Jeanette in New York, for teens with disabilities. And those campers became the activists in the disability rights movement that fought for the passage of the Americans with Disability Act. And those actions eventually led to the passage of the ADA in 1990. I was so thrilled to be part of that moment in history. When I left the Center for Accessible Living and moved to Seattle in the early 1990s and took back up the private practice of law, I looked out for ways in which I could use my volunteer hours to support the disability rights organizations in the Seattle area. I'm a bit of a volunteer-aholic. And I worked at an independent living center for the blind, supported housing rights, and now I'm still co-director of a camp for residential recreation for adults with disabilities every summer in Vashon. And when I joined Starbucks 21 years ago as a litigator, I utilized my experiences, even though that was in my job description, to champion and support our efforts to become a more accessible and inclusive company. An organization called Disability Rights Advocates once challenged Starbucks and told us that our handoff plane, the place where we handed off a beverage in our stores, were too high and couldn't be reached by people in wheelchairs or people of shorter stature. And rather than fight that, we talked to the organization and figured out how we could do better. And we eventually lowered those planes. So not only they were more accessible to people with disabilities, but actually we opened up the ability for the barista to interact with all customers, disabled or not. 30 years after the passage of the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act, I reflect back on when I became a disability rights advocate in the first place. And I think back of my childhood and the relationships of the people I loved and those who advocated for them. I realized the respect, dignity, and value that all persons had. And I honor, appreciate, and respect everything you do to fight for the hope, dignity, and respect of your children. I'm so sorry that the chaos in the world right now particularly impacts you and your children. But I know that you will fight, just like my Aunt Mary did for my cousin Barbara 60 years ago. Now, at age 65, Barbara is thriving, independent, with a job, and living on her own, and has a life worth living, even without her parents. Thank you for your fierce advocacy and support for your children. And thank you, Kindering, for being a beacon of light and hope. You are an organization worthy of our support.
Thank you, Lucy, for sharing your passion and enduring work as an advocate for our community. We appreciate all of you joining us today and opening your hearts to our children and families. Again, as a reminder, our sponsors have joined forces and offered up a $25,000 match for all gifts given today. We hope you are inspired to donate through our website or give directly from your mobile device. You'll find specifics at the bottom of your screen, as well as in the video description details on today's YouTube video. Many thanks again to all of our generous 2020 Kindering sponsors and today's event chairs, Holly and David May. Thank you for spending the afternoon with me from the comfort of your home, and I hope to see you in person again soon.